The warship Zinthervex floated in orbit above a dry red planet. Its metal surface glowed under twin suns, sharp and perfect, just like its commander. Commander Threxia stood at the front of the control deck. Tall, proud, and silent, her violet skin shimmered under the cold lights. Her eyes sharp like glass. She didn't smile, didn't laugh. Didn't tolerate weakness, not in her crew, and definitely not in humans. Threxia was born in battle, trained in fire, and raised to rule. Her word was law on this ship, and her presence alone made soldiers stand straighter. Her species, the Velkari, believed in power, control, and logic. Feelings were for the weak, and humans, in her mind, were full of feeling soft, messy, and strange. But today, a human was coming aboard. Not her choice. It was a direct order from the Coalition Council. A human technician had been assigned to help fix the ship's unstable power core. Threxia didn't like it, didn't want it, but she followed orders. Still, she made one thing clear to her crew. "He stays out of my way," she said coldly, "and we pretend he doesn't exist." The shuttle arrived silently, docking with perfect timing. The human stepped out wearing a plain jacket, tool belt, and a relaxed smile. He looked around and said, "Nice place. Smells like burnt toast and tension." The crew looked shocked, tense, waiting for Threxia to snap. She didn't. Not yet. "Name," she demanded, her voice like ice. "Lucas," he said simply. "Just Lucas, ma'am." She narrowed her eyes. "Commander Threxia. Not ma'am. Got it." "Commander Kitten," he said under his breath. A few officers choked, trying not to laugh. Threxia blinked slowly, not sure if she had heard that right. She let it go. For now, Lucas was assigned to the engineering bay. Threxia thought he would slow things down, make messes, ask stupid questions. But within 1 hour, he had already found the core's fault, rewired the control grid, and improved coolant flow. Her engineers watched him work like he was magic. Threxia watched too, but from the shadows. Later that day, she called a private report from engineering. "How did the human do it so fast?" she asked. Her chief engineer, a quiet, older Velkari, replied, "Commander, he understands machines like they speak to him." Threxia didn't like that answer, but it was true. She decided to speak with the human directly. She found Lucas in the maintenance hallway, sitting with his back against the wall, sipping something hot. He saw her and smiled. "You look like you could use a break." "Commander, I don't take breaks," she replied coldly. "That's probably why you're always so grumpy," he said, handing her a second cup. She didn't take it at first, but after a long pause, she grabbed it, just to prove it didn't bother her. It was sweet, warm, full of spices she couldn't name. She took a sip, then stared at the cup like it had betrayed her. Lucas chuckled. "Told you, not poison." Threxia narrowed her eyes. "I do not fear poison," he grinned. "No, but you fear kindness." That sentence hit her harder than she expected. She looked away, muttering, "Your presence disrupts the ship's order." Lucas leaned back and replied, "Or maybe your order needs a little shaking." She almost growled, but something deep inside her chest moved, something unfamiliar. Was it curiosity, annoyance, or interest? The next morning, Threxia woke earlier than usual. She didn't know why, but she walked by the engine room before her shift. She found Lucas already inside, humming softly while tightening cables. He turned to her with a smile. "You checking on me again?" "That's cute." "No," she said quickly. "Just passing by, of course," he replied, pretending to believe her. Later, during a crew meeting, she noticed something odd. The officers were relaxed, more focused, more alive. Lucas had only been there 1 day, and already the atmosphere was changing. She didn't like losing control, but she also couldn't deny the results. That evening, alone in her quarters, Threxia stared at her reflection. She touched her lips, confused. She had smiled today, just a little. Why? Because of a human. That was absurd, yet her heart beat just a bit faster when she remembered his voice. His smile, his strange charm. Commander Threxia shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. But somewhere, deep in her warrior mind, a quiet truth whispered. The human wasn't scared of her. He treated her like an equal. Like a person, not just a leader, not just a title. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel cold. She felt alive. Lucas walked through the metal corridors like he belonged there. He hummed as he worked, nodded at officers, and even offered snacks to guards standing at their posts. No one understood how he moved so freely. Threxia had not given him that permission, but no one dared to stop him either. There was something about him, something strange. He wasn't strong, he wasn't tall, and he definitely wasn't fast, but somehow he felt dangerous in a calm way. Threxia watched from the upper deck, arms crossed, her eyes like cold stars. She didn't like this feeling inside her chest, made her uneasy. He was changing her crew, her ship, even her silence. She had built her command on discipline, fear, and respect. Lucas brought laughter, ease, and warmth. It was like watching a storm made of sunlight. The crew had started calling him Fixer. Even the chief pilot asked him for help adjusting the console. He fixed it in 5 minutes and then said, "Try it now, boss lady." Everyone waited for the pilot to be offended, but she laughed instead. Threxia's jaw tightened. They were starting to follow him without fear, without order, and still, Lucas never acted like he wanted control. He just helped, smiled, and moved on. That night, Threxia couldn't sleep. Her room was dark and cold as always, but her thoughts were loud. Why did his voice echo in her mind? Why did her hands still remember the warmth of the drink he gave her? She sat up and opened her command logs, trying to distract herself, but instead of typing, she whispered softly. "Kitten." She blinked, shocked by her own voice, and shut the screen in anger. He had called her that Commander Kitten. No one had ever dared. And yet she hadn't punished him. Why? The next morning, Lucas arrived late to the engine deck. Grease on his shirt, a wrench in one hand, and a datapad in the other. He walked straight into the command chamber without knocking. Threxia stood by the holographic map, her tail slowly curling. "You're late," she said flatly. He nodded. "Had to help your medic. One of the cooling pipes burst, nearly steamed the med bay." She tilted her head. "You risked exposure for that?" He smiled. "Someone had to fix it. I was closest." She didn't reply, just stared at him. He walked closer and placed the datapad on the table, but didn't step away. They were face to face now, inches apart. Threxia could smell oil and something sweet on him, maybe cinnamon. Lucas looked into her eyes. Not like a soldier, not like a servant. He looked at her like he saw her, not the armor, not the command, just her, he said quietly. "For someone who runs a warship, you look like you carry more weight than the engines." She didn't answer, but her fingers twitched. He leaned in slightly, voice lower. "Do you ever rest, Threxia?" No title, no rank, just her name. It felt like a touch on bare skin. She didn't push him away, didn't shout. Instead, she turned and said, "Go back to your duties." Lucas didn't argue. He just smiled and left, but as the door closed, her hands trembled slightly, something she hadn't felt in years. Later that day, Lucas walked into the cafeteria. The alien crew was eating silently, as usual. He sat at an empty table and pulled out a tiny speaker. Music started playing, soft, strange human music. Some aliens looked up, confused, others curious. Then something unexpected happens. Someone tapped their fingers along with the beat. Then another, and another. The sound filled the cold room with something warm and alive. Threxia entered just in time to see it. Her soldiers smiling, moving. Relaxing, she froze. Lucas saw her and gave a short wave. She didn't wave back. But she didn't stop the music either. She stood in silence for a long minute, then turned and walked away. But behind her calm steps, her mind was on fire. She had spent years teaching fear, building control, shaping the perfect machine. But this human, he didn't fight her. He melted her walls without trying that evening. She stood on the balcony outside her chambers. The stars looked closer than ever, as if watching her. A quiet voice spoke behind her. Nice view? She didn't jump. She knew it was him. Do you always sneak around like this? She asked without turning. Lucas stepped beside her, hands in his pockets. Only when the stars are too quiet, they stood together in silence. The galaxy wide and endless around them. Threxia glanced sideways and saw him smiling not at her, but at the stars. He wasn't afraid of her power, her rank, or her silence, and somehow, that made her feel less alone. A cold wind passed between them, but neither moved, and somewhere inside, the cold commander felt something new, not weakness, not fear, but the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. Threxia stood in the training room alone, her arms locked behind her back. Blades hovered in the air before her. Moving fast, sharp, programmed to attack, she moved like liquid metal, perfect. Silent, deadly, but her mind wasn't focused. She saw his face in every reflection, heard his voice in the hum of the weapons. Lucas, the human who didn't fear her, didn't obey her like the others. He didn't act like she was dangerous, he acted like she was real. A blade came too close and sliced her arm. The pain was shallow, but the meaning was deep. She had never been distracted like this before. She turned off the drones, breathing harder than usual. Something was wrong, or maybe something had already changed. Later, she called him to her private chamber, not out of curiosity, but to test something. He arrived wearing that same casual grin, as if being summoned by a warrior queen meant nothing. Did I break something again? He asked playfully. Threxia didn't laugh, didn't smile. She stepped close, stopping inches from him, her eyes cold. I think you're interfering with my command, she said, voice firm. Lucas tilted his head. How? You distract the crew. You shift their focus. You turn discipline into comfort. And is that bad? He asked, without backing away. Threxia's hand moved to his collar, not gentle, not soft. She pulled him close, enough to feel the heat of his skin. Are you trying to tame me, human? She whispered. Lucas's smile didn't fade. No, he said calmly. I think you were never wild to begin with, just lonely. That word hit her harder than a strike to the chest. Lonely. She didn't let go, but her grip changed from force to hesitation. You think too much, she said quietly. Only when I'm around someone worth thinking about, he replied. She stepped back, her expression unreadable. You may leave, she said. Lucas nodded. No fear in his eyes, but before walking out, he looked over his shoulder and said, even predators want to be seen, not just obeyed. The door closed behind him, and Threxia stood in silence, heart beating in a rhythm she didn't recognize. That night, she dreamt. She hadn't dreamt in years, not since her youth. In the dream, she wasn't in armor. She wasn't giving orders. She was walking beside someone, hand in hand. No war, no walls, no fear. She woke up with a name on her lips. Lucas. She didn't know what to do with that. The following day, tension hit the ship. A communication probe returned with disturbing signals. Something was watching them from the edge of the system. Threxia activated, high alert, ordered scans, doubled patrols. The crew moved fast, following her orders without question, except one. Lucas walked into the control chamber with a calm look, holding a damaged sensor chip. I think your enemy is not outside the ship, he said. It's in here. Everyone turned to stare, confused. Threxia's eyes narrowed. Explain. He tossed the chip on the table. Sabotage. Someone wants to make it look like we're being watched, but it's fake. Gasps echoed across the chamber. Threxia stepped forward. How do you know? Lucas shrugged. I know lies when I see them, and this one smells like panic. She took the chip and examined it. He was right. A fake signal loop designed to cause fear and mislead command. A trap from within. The crew looked to her for orders, but her mind was torn. Not by fear, but by something deeper. This human, without rank, without armor, had protected her ship, her crew, and her mission. She gave him a long stare. And this time, it wasn't cold. Thank you, she said quietly. Lucas grinned. Told you I'm more useful than I look. As the crew dispersed, Threxia remained still in that moment. Something inside her shifted. She had doubted him, questioned him, tried to test him, but Lucas never lied. Never tried to take control. He simply gave it back to her when she was losing it. That night, she stood at the edge of the observation deck. The stars stretched beyond sight, cold and beautiful. Lucas stood beside her again. Silent, respectful. After a long moment, she said, You speak to people like they matter. He nodded, because they do. And what about me? She asked. He turned to her, soft eyes meeting hers. You matter most when you stop pretending you don't need anyone. Her breath caught for a second. Just a second, she didn't push him away. Not this time. Lucas was fixing a damaged energy conduit. When she walked in, he didn't turn, didn't salute. Just kept tightening the bolts with one hand. Threxia stood behind him, watching in silence, her arms crossed. Normally, she hated silence, but around him, it felt heavier. She broke. At first, you've made the crew lazy. Lucas paused, glanced back, or human. She frowned. They obeyed without question before. Maybe they still obey, but now they breathe too, he replied with a quiet smile. She wanted to argue, wanted to remind him that structure built empires, but her voice didn't come. Because somewhere inside, she knew he was right. The halls weren't just cleaner now, they were calmer. The officers spoke more, even laughed behind closed doors. And when she walked past, they didn't fear her. They respected her different, but real. Lucas put down his tool and stretched his arms. So what's wrong today, Commander Kitten? Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't growl, not this time. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice low. Do not call me that in public again, only in private then, he asked, teasing. Her hand twitched, but her claws didn't come out. She didn't understand this game he played or why she didn't want it to stop. The shift changed, and Threxia returned to her chamber. She poured herself a drink, bitter and cold, but even it couldn't quiet her mind. She stood before the mirror, stared at her own face. The perfect image of control, of rank, of strength, and yet, beneath that, something else had begun to wake. Something that smiled in the dark when she remembered the way he looked at her. Like she was more than just a title, more than her species, more than a mask. A few hours later, a small gathering formed in the rec hall. Someone had unlocked a human game cards, jokes, storytelling. Threxia passed by the open door. Curious, unseen, and there he was, Lucas, sitting between two engineers and a security officer. He was laughing, telling a story about Earth, about rain, about a cat that wouldn't stop following him. The crew leaned in, hanging onto his every word like it was gold. She was about to walk away when someone new walked in. Lieutenant Sarvietal, sharp, confident, and very much not shy. She touched Lucas's shoulder without permission, leaned down, whispering something that made him laugh again. Threxia's chest tightened. Not with anger, but with something she couldn't name yet. She didn't like it, didn't want to feel it, but there it was, clawing at her from inside. Sarvia sat next to him, a little too close, her smile wide. her tail brushing his boot. Threxia turned away and walked off. Her steps stiff, her breath uneven. She didn't sleep that night. She didn't dream either, only stared at the ceiling. Wondering why it mattered so much. Why did she care who sat next to him? Why did her heart burn at the sound of another female's laughter? The next day, Lucas found her in the strategy room. He carried 2 mugs coffee, human style. She didn't speak when he entered, but he placed the mug on her desk, then sat down, uninvited. "You left last night," he said, watching her carefully. She didn't meet his eyes. "I had work," he smirked. "You always have work, but yesterday you were." "Watching, I do not spy," she snapped. "I didn't say spy." He replied gently. "I said watching." A long pause followed, like 2 storms circling each other. Then Lucas leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You're not angry because of me, are you?" She didn't answer, but her jaw tightened. "You're angry because someone else touched what you weren't ready to admit you wanted." He continued softly. That hit her like a blade between armor plates. Her eyes widened. Slightly, but her voice came out strong. "I do not belong to anyone." Lucas nodded. "Then don't act like you do." She stood suddenly, sharp and tall. But not cold this time, confused, burning. "You confuse everything," she said, her voice shaking. "My crew, my ship, my mind." Lucas stood too. Calmer than her, always calmer, and still. "You let me stay," he said gently. "Why?" She looked at him then, really looked, not as a commander. Not as an alien, not as a threat, just as a woman. Standing too close to something she couldn't push away anymore. Her next words were almost a whisper. "I don't know, Lucas." Smiled, the kind that wasn't playful this time. "I do," he said, "because someone finally saw you." Threxia didn't stop him when he stepped closer, didn't move when he brushed a finger against her hand. Her claws remained in, her shoulders relaxed, for the first time. She didn't speak like a commander. She stood still like a person who wasn't used to being wanted, not like this, not gently. And when he walked away, she didn't order him to stop, but her heart did, in its own silent language. The red lights flashed through the ship like blood rushing through metal veins. Sirens echoed, not in warning, but in panic. Threxia was already running, her boots hitting the floor with cold precision. Every corridor screamed confusion. Crew members racing to their stations. The ship had been hit, but no enemy was on the radar. It made no sense, and the second blast came, shaking the floor like thunder underfoot. Smoke curled from the central engine room. Metal groaned like it was in pain. Threxia slid into the room, coughing through thick black clouds. And there he was, again, in the middle of chaos. Lucas, covered in grease, sweat pouring down his face, hands deep inside the cracked coolant pipe. He didn't look scared, only focused, as if this chaos was just another puzzle to solve. "You shouldn't be here," she shouted. He didn't look up. "Neither should you. The core's unstable, it could blow," she warned. Lucas grinned, even while smoke burned his eyes. "That's why. I'm fixing it." Another tremor hit the floor, sending a pipe crashing down. It missed Lucas by inches, but Threxia was already moving. She threw herself forward, pulling him back, landing hard on the floor beside him. Her breath came sharp, pain flaring in her shoulder. Lucas rolled to his side, looking at her with disbelief. "Did you just save me?" She growled, "Don't get used to it." But her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fire or falling metal. The emergency doors sealed shut behind them. They were trapped, together, inside the failing engine room. Steam hissed around them, heat rising, systems screaming for shutdown. Lucas crawled to the side panel, trying to override the controls. "Cooling lines are fried," he said. "We have minutes." Threxia pulled herself up, holding her injured arm. "There's an emergency coolant line under the main turbine," she said. "But it's manual." Lucas looked at her, serious now. "We need to release it together." The two dropped to the floor. Crawling beneath wires and heat coils, sweat clung to Threxia's skin, pain sharp in her joints. Lucas reached the valve first, but it was rusted tight. Threxia placed her hand over his, their fingers brushing for a split second. Together, they pulled muscle against metal. Skin against fire. The valve screamed, but finally turned. Releasing a blast of freezing mist into the burning chamber, they fell back, coughing, gasping, but alive. The red lights blinked once, then faded. Power returned, slowly, quietly, like a sigh of relief. Silence fell around them, thick and strange. Lucas lay on the floor, eyes closed, breathing hard. Threxia looked at him. Saw the burn marks on his hands, the exhaustion in his face, and yet, somehow. He smiled through it all. "You did good," he said softly, voice rasping. She sat beside him, still holding her arm. "You're reckless." He looked at her with tired eyes. "Takes one to know one." She didn't laugh, but her mouth curved slightly almost. When the emergency doors opened, the crew rushed in. Medics pulled them apart, voices loud and urgent. But before they were fully separated, Threxia leaned down close to his ear and whispered one word: "Thanks. Not for the repairs, not for the fire, but for something deeper, something she couldn't admit yet." Later, she sat in the med bay, arm wrapped in cool gel. Reports came in damage assessed, repairs underway, system stable, but her mind wasn't. On the data, it was on the human who didn't run, who didn't hide, who faced death like it was just another machine to fix, and pulled her with him through fire without blinking. Lucas was resting in the next room, quiet, heart rate steady. She watched him through the glass for a long time. Not as a commander, not as a superior, but as a woman who had never seen someone like him before, someone who didn't ask for permission to care, who made her feel seen even when she tried to hide behind rank and rules. That night, she didn't go back to her quarters. She stayed in the med bay, seated beside his bed. She said nothing, but her fingers rested close to his, almost touching, but not quite. It was the first time she had ever fallen asleep beside someone without armor. And she didn't dream of war, or command, or fear. She dreamed of silence and hands, and a moment that wasn't built on control, but on choice. The ship was quiet now. No alarms, no tremors, no shouting voices in the hallway. Only the soft hum of repaired systems, steady and cold. But Threxia felt none of that peace inside her. She sat alone in the command chamber. Lights dimmed. Fingers tapping slowly on her desk. Reports scrolled past her eyes, but she wasn't reading them. Her mind was still in the med bay, next to a human who didn't belong here, and yet somehow did. Lucas had been cleared by the medics, burns healing fast. But they'd ordered him to rest. He, of course, ignored that part. Threxia had watched on the hallway monitor as he limped down to the supply deck just hours later, helping. A technician carried broken panels. He smiled at everyone, joked like nothing happened, like almost dying didn't mean anything. She hated that, and yet she admired it too. The next time they met was brief. She passed him in the hallway, both of them walking in opposite directions. He gave her a small nod, eyes soft but distant. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out, and then he was gone. It shouldn't have mattered, but the silence he left behind felt heavier than any injury. She started noticing the way her crew looked at him now, not just as a helper, but as one of them. He ate with them, laughed with them, even fixed their private quarters without being asked. They called him by name, just Lucas. No rank, no fear. Even her top security officer had asked her, "Will he stay permanently?" And Threxia had no answer, only a strange ache behind her ribs. That night, she sat in her quarters, staring at her reflection again, but this time her armor was off. She wore simple clothes, soft and dark, and her hair was down. She looked different, not weaker, but less guarded. And that scared her more than any battle ever had. A small knock came at the door. She turned, eyes sharp again. But her voice was calm. "Enter." It was him. Of course, it was him. He stepped inside. Slowly, holding a small data chip in one hand, "I thought you might want this," he said, placing it on the table. Security footage from the engine room, cleaned up. She didn't move to pick it up. Just watched him. He stood still for a second, then said, "I've been thinking." That made her heart beat faster, but she showed no sign of it. "About what?" she asked carefully. Lucas looked her in the eyes. Serious this time. No teasing, no jokes. "About what happens after I leave." There it was, the word she feared, but never prepared for. Leave? Of course. He would. He was human. Temporary. A guest on her ship, and yet the idea felt wrong. Her hands clenched slowly on the armrest. "You're not ordered to leave," she said. "No," he agreed. "But maybe I should." Her breath stopped for a second. He stepped closer. Voice lower. "I've changed things here, haven't I?" She didn't answer. He continued. "I changed you too." That hurt more than it should have. Because it was true, and it was terrifying. "You made me feel things I didn't have names for," she said, barely louder than a whisper. Lucas didn't move, just waited. She stood, her body still tall. Still strong, but something in her eyes had softened. "I don't want to be weaker," she added. Lucas gave her a small smile, the kind that didn't mock, didn't push. "You're not," he said. "You're just finally open." There was silence again, deep and wide. And then she stepped forward, only once, close enough to feel the warmth between them, but still not touching. "If you leave, I won't stop you." She said. "I know," he replied. "That's why I might stay." That broke something inside her quietly, gently, because it meant the choice was his, not hers. And for once, she was not in control, not of him, not of her ship, not of her own heartbeat. Lucas stepped back, respectful, giving her space. He turned toward the door, hand reaching for the panel. But before he could press it, she spoke again. "Do you really see me?" she asked. Not as a commander, not as a warrior, but as a woman trying to understand herself. He looked back and said softly, "I saw you the first day. I'm just waiting for you to see you too." The door slid open, and he left, leaving behind silence again, but not the same kind. This time, it was filled with something unfinished, something waiting to be said, to be claimed, to be held. Threxia stood in her chamber long after he was gone, her armor still untouched, her breath still uneven. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this: if Lucas walked away, it would not be because she pushed him. It would be because he gave her the choice not to. And that, somehow, was the most powerful thing anyone had ever done to her. Asterisk. Asterisk. The stars above the ship shimmered like cold silver dust. It had been 3 days since Lucas stepped out of her chamber. 3 days of silence between them. 3 days where Threxia gave orders, reviewed reports, walked the halls, but everything felt off, like something important had gone missing. The crew noticed it too, though they said nothing. She had not smiled once, had not paused to watch, had not whispered his name when passing the lower deck. Lucas was still there, still working, still fixing everything he touched, but his eyes no longer lingered when she passed. His voice was still warm, but not as warm as before. He had pulled back, not out of anger, but respect. She had not asked him to stay, and he had listened. That night, Threxia stood before the observation glass again. The stars were quiet, distant, uncaring. She wondered if they ever missed what they once held close. She closed her eyes and whispered something into the stillness. something her soldiers would never hear. "Come back." She turned to leave, but stopped. There on the ledge of the window was a small box, simple, square, no lock, no label. She opened it slowly, her heartbeat rising without permission. Inside was a tiny silver bell, the kind humans put on pet collars, and a small note written in human script. It said, "Not to tame you, only to remind you you're allowed to be soft too." Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. The bell was light, almost weightless, but it felt heavier than her sword. She closed the box, stood frozen for a long moment, then moved. She found him outside the flight deck, sitting on the floor, legs stretched out, arms behind his head, looking up at nothing like it mattered. She stopped in front of him, silent. He didn't look up, only said softly, "Did you read it?" She nodded, then sat beside him, knees barely brushing. They didn't speak for a while. The silence was no longer sharp. It was gentle. "I've led armies," she said quietly. "Burned cities, ended rebellions." Lucas waited, watching her face. "But this," she continued, "this was the first war I didn't know how to win." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it wasn't a war. Then what was it?" She asked. "A rescue," he replied. "You just didn't know you needed one." She looked at him then, and he saw it clear, raw, real. No masks, no walls, no blades, only her, sitting beside him. Finally, without fear, he didn't touch her, didn't lean in. He just waited, and she reached out first. Her hand rested over his, fingers curling slowly. "I don't want you to go," she said. He turned his hand, laced his fingers with hers. "Then tell me to stay," she breathed. Deep, the hardest command she'd ever given. "Stay." Lucas nodded. No big words, no promises, just a smile that reached his eyes. "All right, Commander Kitten," she laughed quietly. Really laughed, and it surprised even her. Not the cold laugh of control, but the warm one of being free. Free from fear, from rank, from loneliness. Time passed, the ship moved, but something deeper had changed. He moved into her quarters not because she ordered it, but because she asked. Their evenings became quiet. Shared meals, soft talks. Some nights they said nothing, some nights they said everything. She still gave commands, still trained, still held power. But when she returned to her room, she no longer had to sleep alone in the silence. One morning, he woke to find her staring at him. "What?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. She placed the little silver bell beside his pillow. "You're not the only one allowed to play games," she said. He chuckled. "You're adorable when you try to act tough." "I am tough," she replied. Climbing on top of him, he grinned, pulling her close. "Yes. But now you purr too." From that day on, the crew noticed something else. Their fierce commander still walked like a storm, but her edges were softer now. Her voice was still sharp, but sometimes it carried a secret smile. And once, just once, someone heard her laugh when Lucas called her from across the bridge. "Commander Kitten, status report." She had rolled her eyes and replied without pause. "Still ruling, still terrifying, still yours." The crew never asked questions. They didn't need to. Because every time they saw the two walking side by side, they knew the truth. He hadn't tamed her. He'd simply loved her until she stopped needing the armor at all.